What happens when an engineer realizes that people matter more than technology? My guest, Chirag, has spent 20 years at top companies like John Deere, leading digital transformation, supply chain modernization, and executive coaching. But here's what's fascinating. Despite his Stanford education and engineering background, his biggest leadership lesson wasn't about technology. It was about people, trust, and transformation. How do you lead when everything is changing? How do you build trust when employees don't believe in leadership? And what hard-earned lessons can you take from Chirag's career? This episode is packed with real-world leadership wisdom, coaching insight, and career-defining moments. Let's dive in. Okay, everybody, I'm with Chirag. This is the Aligned Ambition podcast, and I want you all to imagine for a second that you're leading a team at a legacy company, and suddenly everything is changing. You have AI, automation, supply chain disruptions, and now you need a coach to guide you through it, an executive coach that's value-based. Who would you go to? We got Chirag here. He's our guest speaker, and he is the right person for this kind of challenge. He's a Stanford-trained engineer turned leadership coach, and he's spent 20 years at top companies spearheading digital transformation, supply chain modernization, and executive coaching. So Chirag, I'm curious if you could just give us a quick introduction to yourself. Did I miss anything there?
No, I mean, you said it better than my LinkedIn probably did. So thank you. Again, Chirag Panjikar. Everything you said is absolutely right. I got my master's in manufacturing systems at Stanford. I was working in the US after that. And then I had a chance to go back to India, which is where I'm from, in 2006 to be one of the first employees with John Deere to set up their India facility in their virtual manufacturing position. So my wife and I didn't have children at that time, and we said, well, we always wanted to go back to India since that's where our family was from, and this position was in the same town that both my wife and I grew up in. So we said, perfect, we can go back. And so I was, like I said, one of the first employees with my company, John Deere, which is where I still work, and John Deere in India, sorry. And set up that facility, had a whole bunch of different roles in managerial and individual contributor roles. I was a new product program manager. I was an IT program manager, people leader of a fairly large team, about 250 people. Excuse me. And in 2018, I got a chance to come through Deere on an expat assignment in the US. As again, it was a developmental opportunity. And my wife and I, since we'd lived in the US, but by then we'd had children and we always wanted our kids to have a flavor for what our life was. We said, okay, let's take a 2-year gig and come. And that 2-year gig has become now 7-year gig and more and counting. And so now I'm based out of the Cary, North Carolina area. And within Deere in, I think 2013, I may have the year there, about 2013 or so, we used to have an internal coaching cadre. So I was one of those members, and we used to have a fairly functional group of coaches who would coach members or up-and-coming leaders and high-potential employees. And so I did this coaching for about 6 years, thereabouts. I think 2019 was the last I did it. And then, that coincided with the time that I was here and I had other responsibilities, and I stopped that. And early 2024, I was feeling a little, I'd say, unsure of what's happening with myself. I was feeling a little in a funk, if I may use that phrase. And when I did some reflection, I felt that, hey, I was at my best when I was a coach. So I said, okay, let me get back into coaching. And so while I still have my job, I am also an executive leadership career coach. For me, I don't like to bracket myself as an X coach or Y coach. I think a coach is a coach. Um, and from my perspective, I'm I just like to help people, and I have found that helping people helps me become a lot better at what I do. So that's about me.
That's huge. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that's amazing that you have such a successful career and an amazing education, and you're taking a different path than a lot of people where you're leaning into coaching and finding values based work. And so I'm curious, what leadership journey along the way made you realize that?
Um, I've always felt that for me, leadership is not just about my success. I think the the team that I started out, my first leadership experience was quite transformative for me. In that I was, along with developing my own organization. Like I said, I was the first employee at in that function. So I had to set it up. I had to set up practices. I had to set up policies. I had to do some of the hiring and recruitment. I had to do like a whole bunch of it, along with also doing my work. And the job itself was very exciting. But I realized that what we were doing at that time, without going into too many details, was quite futuristic for 2006. Okay, so like today it's fairly commonplace, but 19 years ago it was like quite futuristic too. Having to create that vision, having to create that team camaraderie or whatever was just as important as getting my work done. Because if people are not bought in, it doesn't work, right? And as far as possible, I've tried to keep that philosophy. Like, if I can't do this alone, um, and I've tried to be as true to it as possible.
That makes that
Sorry, go ahead.
no, that I think that's powerful. Like it sounds like I just play it back at you. It sounds like you're saying you went into this role as a technical expert, and then you realized that the people were even more important than the technical expertise. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you put it really well. Like, for me, it was, we ended up, or you end up starting. I mean, when you look at a resume, you know their technical skills at some level, but you also need to know the person behind that resume, um, because that person has certain characteristics, has certain capabilities, um, and you need those just as much to succeed as their technical knowledge, if that makes sense. So oftentimes we would recruit on potential.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I can't tell you how many times in my organization I've seen someone maybe failing in one area, and then if you map his skill sets to another area, his or her skill sets, they can thrive in a different area. And so knowing your people is so essential to not just your team, but the organization as a whole. And so that's really insightful. With that in mind, what's your leadership style? What's the one principle you say that you live by, or what? I'm not asking the question the right way. If I was, if I had worked with you for 10 years in that 250 person organization, what would I be like? Oh, this is his style, you know?
Ah, okay. Um, I'd like to say approachable.
Mm,
Um, I would think that, at least this is how I'd like to think of myself, right? Is I don't, I think people find me, and this is uncomfortable talking good things about yourself, right? But um, I think people find me approachable. Um, and I've tried to be deliberate about that approachability. Because if people, or if I can give my team members a feeling of safety, then they can thrive. Like, I think of myself kind of like maybe I'll go back to my childhood, when we would have the circus performers, there's always a safety net. I mean, they don't need a safety net, but there always has to be one. And I've always felt that that leader has to be a kind of a safety net um, to the team members. And then the other thing, what I've always felt is, and this is again just my opinion, is a lot of leadership is to clear out the the haziness for your employees or for your team members. So I think good leaders can take abstract concepts and convert them into actionable activities versus I'd say a not so good leader would probably try to only talk in those abstract terms and then not connect with their employees. So I've tried to be as far as possible, like take an abstract term and say, okay, what does this mean in my daily life? And how can I live that abstract? How can I, deliver those qualities in that? And again, some of the stuff I read and research I did that followed in, and that's been the philosophy, like taking abstract terms and then converting that into actionable, you know, or visible behaviors.
Yeah, I mean that's complex. I hear three things there: approachable, building safe spaces, and then taking a vision and that strategy and then leading into execution. And
Right.
that's not always easy, right? It's taking an objective and then trying to make it into the key results. Oh my gosh,
Right.
it sounds easy on paper, but it's hard.
Yeah. I mean, I'll put it this way, right? You have, we talk about a leader should develop trust. I mean, that's, I guess, a fairly given statement, right? But what does that mean? You know, how do you convert that abstract noun of trust into actionable behaviors? And that's the skill of leadership. The I've always felt that it's very difficult to define what is leadership, what is trust, what is community, etc., etc. But it's very easy to define what it is, like when it is not being displayed. So, for example, you'll hear, "Oh, this is a clear case where it's lack of leadership," right? But it's very difficult to define what is leadership. And I've, at least the formula I've used is to convert those abstract nouns into actionable items or actionable behaviors.
Wow. So, what's the secret there on the team? I know building trust, especially bridging in that large team, bridging the organizational policies and things that might be outside of our control versus the things that are in our control, like our interactions with the teams. How do you bridge that? And then I'm not trying to focus on your corporate leadership here. Like maybe take it from a perspective of if you're coaching a leader who's saying, I'm having trouble building trust with my team because the organization keeps changing policies. How can I, hey, can you help me coach me through this? What would you advise them?
So the first question that I would probably ask them is, what about these changing policies is changing of philosophies, right? I mean, I don't believe organizations do like a 180-degree turn on their philosophy and on their priorities. They might change a policy, and some of those policies might be sometimes, just existential, you know. So they need to make those changes, and setting those contexts are important, you know. Um, and how do you then take that policy end of the day as I'd say as a loyal member of the organization, your job as a leader is as much to defend that policy to your team members, but also be that, I would say, connection to show how this is impacting your employees or your team members' daily lives in some way. You know, if If as a leader we are not able to pass that message upwards, then there is no way we are doing an effective job. Because as a leader, it is just as much of our job to be that messenger. It's not just a one-way message, right? It has to be a two-way message. And to the point of trust, that's where I felt that people will trust you even if you're giving them bad news, if they feel like they can come and be open with you, because we are dealing with adults here, and they know, employees and team members know some of the constraints that leaders operate under. But if we can give them that safe space to come and say, you know just speak what's on their mind, and if nothing else, just to vent, sometimes that's all that you need. So
That's great. And so I love you keep bringing up safe spaces. That's a really interesting theme because that's powerful, right? Having an employee, me, let's say I'm having trust with my team. This is happening a lot in a lot of organizations right now with the work from home situation. It's like, oh, we're going to do remote forever. 4 years later, okay, you're back in office 5 days a week. And now VPs, large leaders are now having to articulate that down. And I think what you're saying here is, hey, if you're frustrated with that, or if that's going to interfere with your family, make a safe space for them, right? Make a safe space for them to communicate that to you. And also make sure that message gets up maybe anonymously. So the feedback gets up to upper management, but doesn't lets the team have a safe space to vent, but also be transparent and not sugarcoating it. Like, hey, this is our policy now,
yeah,
and we're going to have to operate. Right.
yeah. And I think that's where some of the lack of leadership also gets displayed, because people don't mind the what, as long as you can have a reasonable why, you know because like I said, we're all adults. And I mean, I've been happy that I've never, I shouldn't say never, for the majority of the times, whenever my leadership has had any conversations, they've also been able to give a good why with it. So, I would say I'm lucky. But for sure, um, a leader's job, and maybe this goes more into management rather than leadership, but as a leader of people, your job is to be the bridge between your hierarchy and your upper hierarchy and lower hierarchy. Maybe I'll put it that
Yeah, no, that's powerful. I'm curious. I want to focus on your coaching here.
way.
What? Let's flip the script. Let's say an employee of one of those bosses comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'm having trouble trusting my boss."
Mhm.
What's something? I think when I read your work, it sounded like you're a big, and what you're saying here, you're a big believer in agency. That we take responsibility for our own actions. So, what would you say to that employee to help them build resilience through a situation like that, or how would you coach them through it?
So the first question would be, again, convert that statement from "I'm having difficulty trusting my boss" to saying, "Okay, what exactly are you struggling to do?" I mean, that then becomes like, then you start getting into that next question becomes like, okay, when my boss says this, I hear this, you know? And then you get down to
Mhm.
saying, okay, if you're hearing that, why do you think like that? And maybe they say, well, in the past, this has happened. Oftentimes, and I don't say this every time, but oftentimes it even happens that the problem was never with that boss. It's just baggage that they've carried from a completely different boss in a previous job that now makes you never want to trust a boss's words again. you know
Mm.
I mean, I'm not saying that always is the situation. Sometimes, I mean, I don't think we can say we have 100% great bosses on this planet. uh, but oftentimes it could just be distilling down that and saying, okay, if you were to give them the benefit of the doubt, what would you say? And maybe that's generally the question that I would ask them. Like, get it down to that question. Like, maybe they're a horrible human being, but if you were to give them the benefit of the doubt, in what scenario would you give them the benefit of the doubt? And then is that scenario reasonable? Because as a leader, as a manager, I can't tell you everything that happens because I just can't and I shouldn't. And if I can give you some of those reasons, then I'm violating, my oath of office, if you will. So
Mhm.
sometimes you have to put yourself in the shoes of your boss and say, okay, in what scenario would I give this person the benefit of the doubt? Not necessarily that that's what is happening, but then start saying, okay, there is another way to look at this same situation, and if that was the case, would you be okay with it? And not, again, this, maybe it comes off as saying I'm on the boss's side. No, it's just trying to say, the way you're looking at this, could there be a different way of looking at the same thing?
Changing
That's
the
all.
perception.
Right. Reframing the conversation to saying, I mean, and then there can be other questions as well, but how can you try and reframe the question? That's the fundamental of coaching, which is, if you have a coach, the best coaches, I believe, can help you look at the same problem in different ways, right? Um, and then you can stick to your opinion and say, "Okay, well, my boss believes this because they don't like me." Fine, you know. Then, of course, the question will be, okay, what are you going to do about it? But overall, my preference is always to at least open different routes for them and try as far as possible to give that benefit of the doubt to people, because it's
How
very easy to jump to conclusions.
do you see it? This sounds like it's a common problem in coaching, or do you see it a lot of people kind of jumping to conclusions?
I It's not an uncommon problem. Maybe I'll put it that way, right? It's a lot of times. Um, I mean, granted, there are incompetent bosses, for sure. But majority of the times, people are really good at what they're doing, and they just feel like their manager or their bosses are not seeing the same things, and they're seeing something different. The question is, okay, if you were to put yourself in your manager's shoes, what would you say? And oftentimes, that's like, oh, I never thought about that.
Yeah, and that could be so helpful, right? It could be to solve the problems. Then you can get to the real work of, okay, what problem are you actually trying to solve here?
Right.
It's great. So you mentioned it briefly, but can you dive into? Is there a story behind this? Getting your ACC, going from being so credentialed. Stanford isn't the easiest school in the world to get into, or so I hear. And then to be leading 250-person teams to now executive coaching. What's the driver, and who are you trying to help? Who's the people that you're targeting right now?
Um. Okay. So honestly, Stanford was. I never thought I'd get there. Like you said, it's a pretty difficult school to get in. I I'll be lying if I said that I was always going to get there. I was like, what? You know. And this was like, gosh, 24, 25 years ago, when email was just starting. So it's like, I can't even comprehend what it's going to be like. Um, but like I said, I've always felt that I do better at whatever it is that I'm doing when I have an outlet to help people, right? And I'm fairly clear that for me, coaching is, I don't want to call it voluntary, because it is my time, but it is excuse me, it is my way of helping the community, right? I don't see myself becoming a full-time coach anytime in the near future. Okay. Um, it is my way of saying that gives me an outlet to then focus on my job. Um, at least that's where I am right now. Now, your question of how I got into coaching, how I got into it was kind of accidental. Um, but I also found that I think I got lucky with a really good coach for myself when I was getting into this. And I then could see firsthand the power of what a really good coach could do in a very short amount of time. And I said, well, okay, well, this is what this person did for me. It seems easy enough, yeah, but it's not. Um, and then you learn, and if you have, I mean, I felt that, like I said, it makes me better at my day job, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, it makes perfect. So it sounds like if I could dig in there, you had your own executive coach. It sounds like, and they inspired you. Was
Yes.
that how it worked?
Yes. So I had so in, like I said, we had an internal coaching cadre within the company, right?
Yeah.
And just like I was coaching people, when I was new in my job, I had a coach, internal coach, who I think I was super lucky with, was really invested in me and my success. Um, and all I'm doing right now is paying it forward, maybe.
That's awesome. So you just had such a big impact on you, and you want to have that impact on other people.
Yeah. And
I love it.
that showed me the importance of having a coach, because like there were things that I felt uncomfortable talking to my boss or my team members, and my coach basically said, well, then who's affected by this? you know and I mean, it was just one simple question, which was like, the realization was, if I don't have these conversations with my boss or my team members, the only person affected is me. you know so I have to do it, and having those conversations later really helped me in my job as well. So if my coach had not asked me those questions, maybe I would have still been stuck with some of those barriers, and had to pay a price that probably I was not willing to pay.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I've had a similar experience with my executive coaches that I've worked with that got me passionate about it. But you're there is something to having that safe space outside of mentors. Like mentors give you this. I don't know about you, but all my mentors, if they're a partner at some firm, they're always telling me how to become a partner at that firm. Like here, you just got to get back into. They're telling you what worked for them, and then you
Yeah,
have advisors or you have sponsors in your company who are helping you move up in the company. But it sounds like that coach gives you that safe space to actually figure out what you want, right? And that you want to be able to do that for other people too, right?
absolutely. And I think that's what. So I'm also a mentor, right? And I'm also a coach. And it, excuse me, I think especially when you're new in coaching, you can't distinguish the two, right? Um, but what I realized, that a good coach, is not the how do I put this? The maybe I'll put it like, in a movie or in a story, you know, um, the coach is not the protagonist, if that
Mm.
makes sense. You know, the coach is the camera, versus in a mentoring relationship, the mentor is as much of a character in that story as the protagonist, whereas a coach is just a camera. I don't know if that makes any sense, but if the coach is part of the story, then the coach is not doing a good job.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know why it keeps coming to mind, but it's like Star Wars. Like your mentor's like Yoda, and then but you, the coach, you're just looking in the water. You're just it's Luke looking in the water and helping introspection, right, and figuring out
Exactly.
what you really want, right?
Exactly. The coach is a camera or a mirror or whatever you may call it. Um,
Yeah.
if the and that's why you can have very powerful coaching moments. Um, I've had powerful. I mean, I've had good mentoring relationships, but I've never had a powerful mentoring moment, if that makes sense. Because I'm just basically talking about what works for me.
Can you tell
And
me and give me an example of a powerful coaching moment you've had? We can keep it confidential, obviously, around
um,
people.
I so so I think, yeah, maybe I'll put it this way. There was one um situation, and this is somebody I hope sees this podcast at some point as well. So uh, I'll try and keep it as confidential as you can. But they were um, battling, I would say, a personal situation um, where they were doing fairly well professionally, um, but I'll just say, from a social life uh, perspective, they were, it was not a great situation for them. So they were considering, and honestly, at this point, I don't know what they ended up doing. So caveat there. But they called me once and said, hey, these are the situations, and there's this really good. I mean, I'm doing well career wise, but this doesn't feel right for me and my family. Versus this other situation, which is probably a not such a great move career wise, but I know my family would be happier. Um, and in that situation, all it took me to ask them was, well, sounds like you're choosing between two really good options. And it sounds like both options would have some regrets. So, which regret would you rather want to live with? And that was it,
Wow.
you know? Because again, life is about making choices. And there is if there was a choice which was like 100% pros and 0% cons, why are we even having this conversation, right? There has to be some regrets with every choice you make. And if you are going to choose something, which regret are you comfortable living with? I mean, like, again, from my own personal perspective, right? Maybe the regret I'm comfortable living with now is that, I'm not in the country I live in, I grew up in, you know.
It's
But
a real sacrifice. Yeah.
that's a regret that I'm willing to live with for a positive that I'm willing to pay for.
Thank you. No, thank you for sharing. And I think that's my favorite thing about meeting coaches so far, or people about coaching, is this industry is the first time I've seen in business where people start being authentic and you start to actually dig beneath those layers and realize, yeah, there are sacrifices. If you're going to pursue a career and make a director in a big company, are you willing to have daycare for your kids, or are you willing to have
Mhm.
a maid or someone to help you out do that stuff and make that
Well,
sacrifice? And is that sacrifice worth it to you? Or are you going to take the other one and make the career sacrifice? You don't get to do both. And or is there a third path? And thinking through those and helping people work through that, that's such a human. I
mhm.
mean, it's a
And
really powerful thing, right?
yeah, absolutely. And which regret are you more comfortable living with? Also, then allows you, allows me at least, to make peace with the choices I made. You know, because oftentimes we have. I mean, I used to be this way, which was like I would take a path and then whine for the other path. You know,
I feel you. Very
and
human. That's very human to
yeah,
do, man.
sorry, I. So that's kind of, so one coaching moment there, like that's something that I remember, and I've tried to use it often, which is, which regret are you more comfortable living with?
That's a powerful question. Thank you for sharing that. I might borrow it one of these days. Um,
Feel it's not patented. Go for it.
okay, thanks. Thank you. I appreciate it. The I'm curious, since you've been going through the Stanford, like you said, before the email, right when email was coming out. What are you seeing the trends of leadership and coaching over, and how are they evolving over the recent years? Are you seeing any changes?
Mm, I think technology is going to be a big role player. Um, Now, is your question related to changes in coaching or changes in leadership, or just dig a little
Yeah,
deeper into that coach question?
that's a good. Let's stick with. I guess I'm asking from leadership from the perspective of the challenges people will need coaching through.
Okay.
Are you seeing that change, or are these timeless?
Um, I think people will need coaching through um, the biggest. So there are two, three questions, in my opinion, that we as society, or we as a workforce haven't quite figured out. Right. One is, um, what is the relationship between an employee and an organization going to look like in a technology driven world, right? um, and the reason I say that is, I mean, you read the news, I'm sure, as much as I do, and we see hiring spikes and then layoffs, and and those layoffs often are not associated with an equal amount of hiring in that field. So you hear about how technology has taken some of that away. And I go back just one generation, and maybe just some of that comes from like my own life, which is, even one generation ago, most people would feel like, okay, I want to retire with this company, you know, and that unwritten bond, contract, or covenant between the employer and employee doesn't exist anymore, and that's going to go down further. I i will be super surprised. I mean, I was reading a BBC article just a couple of days ago as to how there's a village in India where most people are now YouTube content creators, right? um of course, that's a technology as a force multiplier for employees in this case, but what's that contract between employer and employee is going to go through a rapid change in a technology world. Um,
Could
and
we pause on that for a second? I think that's a
sure thing.
fascinating. Yeah, I'm seeing similar. I'm seeing more people looking at short-term employment and contracting and gig
Really?
economy kind of work, and even taking big jobs at places like Google or Facebook. They're kind of saying, "I'm going to go into it for 2 years." And same to your point, 20 years ago when I started working, I did. Everyone was like, "Wait till you get the gold watch." Wait, you stay with a company for. That's a huge change, very fast. And what's your advice to people navigating that right now, or coaching? How would you coach someone through recognizing that maybe the social contracts change between employee and company?
um Again, there's no formula for this, right? Because from one so okay, there's no formula for the very simple reason that your circumstances are different than mine. So what works for you may not work for me, may not even be close to what works for me. I'll give you an example. I mean, I'm saying this more from my personal life. That is not a case for me right now. But as you can tell, I'm not from the US, right? And for a large amount of time, I was on a visa. So if I get laid off versus you get laid off, the circumstances are completely different. And that's just one example, right? So those What
Mhm.
would be my standard coaching question might be different based on the circumstances of that person, right? But what I would probably ask them to focus on is how they can get control of their own narrative back. And what I mean by that is just as much as technology is making it tougher to, or just as technology is making employee work, I'll just say redundant in a way, it is also making employee work a lot easier and a lot more productive. And how can you take control of that narrative? How can you help define yourself more than just your job in a way? I mean, maybe it's a male thing, okay? But if you go meet a stranger, okay, just go meet a stranger, go talk to them. Within and you introduce yourself to them and you introduce each other, I'm betting within 5 sentences, you're going to say where you work.
Especially in the Bay Area. Yep.
Possible. Well, in the Bay Area, you're probably talking about like how much your startup has been funded by whichever venture
Yeah.
capitalist,
Yeah.
whatever.
No, no, I think your first sentence is, "Hi, I'm Devin and I work at."
It's correct, right? So your organization kind of becomes part of your narrative.
Mhm.
It becomes part of your identity, right? And I believe now in this world that technology allows us to be more than just that identity. We are way more than just employees at Google or John Deere or whatever. So just take what I'm saying, right? I'm a proud John Deere employee, and I'm also an executive coach, and I'm a father, and I'm a husband. And it's always and technology is going to make more and more ands possible for us. And the difference between the haves and the have nots, I think, is going to be those people who can really leverage all these ands for their benefit.
That's really powerful. No, thank you. I can't believe how fast the time's going. We're already running the clock. So I want to circle back. So that was originally to the question of what are what are some of the trends you're seeing or problems that intend for people to face, and with the changes in tech in the changes in the landscape, leadership landscape, and technology being the main one, and then how
Yeah.
can people not take advantage, but how can they go with the trend rather than buck it? And I'm curious, what's your next one in that group? What's another leadership trend that you're seeing?
Um, I think the other one, which I would say is, and this is more on the leader side, is we're getting a lot more short term oriented.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the concept of it's a fast changing environment, etc., can sometimes also be a self fulfilling prophecy. Um, so if as far as I know, the day still has 24 hours, right? Um,
Definitely.
yes, we have information that comes at us a lot faster, right? What used to come with in I don't know Middle Ages with a pigeon carrying a message probably now comes within nanoseconds through an email, right? And that allows you just as much to react as it's not that different when you try to break things. So um, we can also have some sort of a long term view. I think the balance between short termism and long termism has been has been I'll just say there is always an equilibrium between having a short term view and a long term view. And I think because of this, it's a fast changing world, et cetera, et cetera. We have become a lot more short term than long term. And that balance has probably shifted towards the short term view a lot more. And I think we need to bring it back towards the long term. Um, if we can do that, we will benefit. I mean, you can tell um, s- that, and how I would how I would distinguish that is if somebody tells you something and then you ask them a question, they have an answer for that. Like you say, okay, we want to do this, and you say why, and then you say, okay, fine. But if you dig a couple of questions further down, there's no answer. And oftentimes it's those second or third order derivative questions that need to be thought through as to why we're doing something. And if we don't do that, um, we'll struggle.
Yeah, I think that ties into a lot of what else you were saying, and I'm seeing too. And I'm curious your thought here, how that ties into what you're saying earlier about values-based decision making, and making sure that people know what they want and know what regrets that they're going to be making. It sounds something similar there, right? We
Yeah,
kind of are or too reactive. And I'm saying that too is too reactive. And then how I've been trying to struggle with how do you get people to be more proactive and in charge of their narrative as well? Because I feel like people are getting influenced too much by technology and how fast paced the work is. And I like what you said earlier about father, husband, having those priorities, like the ands, I think are really important. I do the same as, hey, I'm going to put my daughter to bed at least 3 times a week. That's important to me. And knowing it's a priority, if I don't do that, if I'm not intentional and do the self work, then you can get really stuck and just react. There's an infinite amount of things that need to be done instantly now, right?
right. And to add to that, where I would say that is really helpful is because again, this employer-employee contract is changing, right?
Mm.
And you will find a lot of people who have followed that old, I'm an XYZ employee as part of their narrative. And then they reach a point where, the families or whatever, really they've moved on. And now this organization has moved on from them too. And now they are like completely lost, you know? So building multiple narratives for yourself and being charge of all the things that you define yourself by is helpful there too. And that's where the long termism helps.
And so I'm getting your sense here. This is something I think we'll be on a cusp for why coaching is going to be so important going forward for
Absolutely.
people, right?
Absolutely. Because coaching brings those questions out in the open. Like, have you thought of this? And if nothing else, like I've had coaches myself who've helped me, um I'd say, just structure my thought process a lot better. Um, and sometimes, I mean, I'm just as guilty as anyone in terms of short term thinking. And have you thought of this? You know, is is a very, very powerful question when asked at the right time. You know, and coaching is going to help you there. And I
Yeah.
think to add, since you asked two or three, I will say the coaches, excuse me, coaches and even all of us who can really harness technology the best way will be the ones that succeed. There's a bit of a rush to use technology for technology's sake and not to solve a problem. And those that are using technology to solve a problem will do better than those who are just using it to show investors.
100%. That's something I've been really passionate about because I head up the accounting and finance SME
Hmm.
role for the AI deals desk, but at Google Cloud. But I've been, well, how did practically do you apply it? And it's very fascinating. There's not a lot of guidance for people on what are best practices to apply it to improve our day to day life. And there are tools like we could record this transcript and play it back and ask, an AI, hey, are there things we could have talked about that were more interesting? Or are there ways where do we connect and how can we foster this relationship more? Or what are good there's ways that people aren't exploring practical application to actually be beneficial and add value. And so that's
Absolutely.
fascinating.
I mean, my favorite anecdote for technology and where technology helps is I mean, I'm old enough to remember a time when we said, well, if computers ever beat humans at chess, that's the end of humanity, right? And lo and behold, a computer beat the best chess player ever. And right now, the quality of chess is better than it ever was because those who can leverage technology do better. So I I'm not a AI doomsayer or whatever to say that AI is going to take away all your jobs. I think there's just as much use for all of it for us that we can make value out of it.
It's just like email, right? It was 20 years ago. Email was
Yeah.
it's just it's a new thing. I thought, hey, I want to respect your time, and I feel like I could
I
talk to
can
another for a
I
few
can go
hours.
I can go a little further if your time is okay.
I,
Let me just
I,
switch on
I,
this light because it's getting a little dark in here.
no, I appreciate it. I know you're a dad and a husband too, and so being a dad and husband too, I know the importance of wrapping up on time. But maybe we could continue the conversation another time. I'm really enjoying this, and I hope you are too. I'm just curious. I want takeaways for you here. What is a professional opportunity or collaboration in 2025 that you're looking forward to, or that you're trying to start?
For me, definitely coaching. I mean, coming back into that same thing, like I said, um, I made a conscious decision to have both my job and my coaching as part of my narrative. So how do I balance that? Uh, is my big lookout. Um, I would I would love to say that I'm a great coach, but I'm learning every day. Every person that I get to coach, I learn something from them. So I'm not in the business of saying that hey, you I only do career coaching or only leadership coaching or etc. etc. I'm just a coach, right? So for me, it's I'll just say getting my coaching muscle to some level of sustainability is my big goal for 2025.
Yeah, that's admirable. You already sound so amazing, but I can see that continuous learning, that drive to be an expert. I can see why you got into Stanford. So, uh, how can me or my audience best support you in your goals for this year, or how can we engage with your work?
Well, so I kind of have a organization that I started called as the Kachua Collective. Uh,
What's that?
so the Kachua is the Hindi word for tortoise, and if you've heard of the story of the hare and the tortoise, um, we slow and steady wins the race because you probably heard it in the US. I heard it in India, but in both versions, it was the tortoise that won the race, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so the slow and steady, um, step by step, ferociously is what kind of the motto of the organization that I'm setting up. And yeah, I mean, just come to the website. I'm trying to also establish a Substack that I hope has some subscribers. It's all there on the website. And just reach out. There's LinkedIn. There's so many things that I mean. I also believe that if you Google my name, I'm the only person who that's the hit. So
Oh,
um,
good.
if
You
you just
monopolize that
Google
one.
my name, you might just find Chirag Panjikar by itself. So um, yeah, that's how you can get a hold of me. I'm fairly easy to get hold of, and like I said, I like to say I'm approachable. So
I love that. Yeah, and we'll put all the links in the video descriptions and
Yvette,
all the everything there, of course. And I love that step by step ferociously. I've never heard that before, but I think that's a really
I will
powerful.
I will not take credit for it. Jeff Bezos
Oh.
has this as a he has the Latin version of this for Blue Origin called
Mm.
Gradatim ferociter. And I just said, that's too high tech for me. I'll just go with English. So,
I like it. I love it. I heard a similar saying someone else told me today was like being aggressively patient. I thought was an interesting thought too. I think it's really powerful. People are moving a little too fast, and the tortoise does win at the end, and all dialogues and stories. Um, okay, we already talked about where people can connect with you. I'll add those. Here, last challenge for you before we'll turn off. I'm going to give you, imagine you're on a podium and you have 15 to 30 seconds just to give the most powerful message you can to the audience. So, and just some words of encouragement or a big takeaway about either navigating career growth, a leadership transition, or just what you think resonates with this. Could you share that?
um, so I'll just use this is something that I have on my wall at work. Is a quote from Samuel Beckett, which is ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better. So keep trying. You have to keep doing what you're doing. Just fail at failing, and you'll be fine.
I love that. That is a perfect way to close this. Thank you so much, Chirag. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. I'll stop the recording now.
Thank you.